Welcome everybody to the technology panel. This is probably the most overarching panel that has ever been presented anywhere. We could go on for hours and have an infinite number of guests and have lots of fun. Before we get started, I want to, I am nominally a SABR employee, so this is somewhat self-referential, but I want to congratulate and thank everyone at SABR for turning a really tough situation into what has been a great event. For those of us who are here, it's been fantastic. I'm sure that people watching remotely have enjoyed it. So I honestly can't believe how you guys pulled this all together so quickly. So congratulations. On our panel today, we have TJ Barra. TJ, raise your hand so we know who you are. There's TJ. TJ is probably the senior baseball data quality analyst, and yes, that is a mouthful, at MLB.com. TJ previously spent 12 years with the Mets and 3 with the Nationals, so a real wealth of experience. We have Seth Daniels. Seth, there's Seth, Director of Sales and Marketing for Rapsodo. And next to me, Scott Coleman, a biomechanist with KinaTrax. So great lineup. The first thing I want to do is just give everybody a chance to maybe take 3 or 4 minutes to talk about what their work. We have 3 very different disciplines here, essentially. And I would love to know more about everything you guys are doing. So, Scott, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So again, Scott Coleman, biomechanist with KinaTrax. So KinaTrax is a markerless motion capture system. So 10 years ago, this was not possible, markerless motion capture. I've been in motion capture, marker-based, for about 25 years now. And I'm excited to really be a part of the markerless revolution. And what KinaTrax does, which is special, is in-game motion capture of pitching and hitting. So what that does is open up tons of doors and avenues for us to really, as we're all here for analytics, it gives us so much more data than we've ever had before. So one team, 1 year, could have over 30,000 events. So we capture hitting and pitching for the home and away team. And we're proud to service 4 major league teams right now, and some of their minor league teams, and soon into college.
Thanks, Scott. Seth, assuming you can hear us.
Here, able to be a part of it. So working with Rapsodo, this is now our 4th year from a sales standpoint, working with teams and also from an amateur market. Rapsodo obviously being the optical and radar version from a launch monitor standpoint, both for pitching and hitting. This year we also launched a high-speed camera that pairs with both of them called Insight. And primarily, obviously, working along with the teams. We're now working with all 30 teams and are contracted with all of those guys. And then also working with scouting bureaus, MLB when we're talking about data collection at international events, et cetera. And then from an amateur side, we're working with over 75% of Division I teams and have thousands of monitors that are out in the public right now that are doing this. So obviously, when we talk about some current events and what we're going through right now, our monitors being able to be used from a one-on-one standpoint, and obviously player development and continued development, that sort of thing, they're getting kind of put to the test right now. But again, happy to be here and appreciate it.
TJ, tell us about your work.
Thanks, Rob, and glad to be here. As you mentioned, I've been in baseball for about 15 years. First couple years with the Nationals when they began in 2005, and the last 12, 13 with the New York Mets, where I oversaw our R&D department. Last year, I had the opportunity to come over to MLB and work on the league side, one of the big key projects we've worked on is the transition and implementation of the next version of StatCast, which was spoken about yesterday. And so it's interesting. I've had the opportunity to see this wave of technology over 15 years, but from the perspective of the teams, but also now from the perspective of the league.
Before we continue, I just want to let everybody know that you can ask questions of our panelists on the YouTube channel. Just type those right in, or if you're here in the room with us, there are cards in the back of the room, and we'll get to those in a bit. TJ, could you tell us maybe one or two things that you've learned over the last year or so that have been the most exciting for you working with the data?
Yeah, I think on the team side, you don't realize how many people and how many hours are put into putting forth the product that MLB puts out, from infrastructure to data quality to all the engineers in place that allow to make the end product happen. And I think it's the work of dozens of people to kind of get to the point where we are today. And the amount of hours spent to kind of put forth the product that we're hoping to put out, and the sort of quality of product that we're sort of put out that benefits not only teams, but our broadcast and other partners of MLB is a massive undertaking and requires a ton of coordination on a lot of people to kind of make it where it is today. And I can't help but be impressed by the group that MLB had in place, from like guys like Greg Kane and Clay Nunnally and Ben Jedlovic to kind of make this happen.
Seth, what have you learned in the last year?
I just feel like we're kind of constantly learning. One of the big things that we continue to push forward is just the rapid pace of technology and knowing that it's going to be expected. Today is going to be a little bit different than tomorrow, so it's kind of up to us and our side from a development standpoint to kind of stay ahead of the curve. That's one of the big things. And then two, just being able to, TJ said there's been this wave of technology, nothing about that's new, but the ability to kind of integrate those things and do, from an ease of use standpoint, we're getting to the point that now teams and not just MLB teams, but teams of all levels are starting to add people that can help digest this data and interpret it. But there's also a need to, from a physical standpoint, of how do we actually take that in. And so that's been a big push for us too, just from an integration standpoint to try to get all of this speaking into one language so we can ultimately help the players and the coaches do a better job.
Scott, what have you learned?
That we have to keep improving innovation, camera technology gets better and better but it seems like by the week. Even our algorithms to keep improving the computer vision. And then also we have to diversify. So one thing that we're actively pursuing is offering a software suite of tools. So it's not just motion capture. We do that. We produce the biomechanical data, but we have to help the end user interpret that, and that means something different for different people. So an augmented reality, virtual reality, different web applications to process that data. So that is, I think, key. I can give out data, too much data right now, but to process that and to teach people how to use that, that's the challenge now. So it's really the education. So that's what I've learned, and I don't think enough people are taking advantage of what we have to offer right now, to be quite honest, yeah.
Well, and Scott, you sort of naturally segued into my next question, which Seth also referenced a little bit, and that is it's one thing to get the data, it's another thing to get it into a form where people can use it. Hundreds, thousands, the dream is everyone can use this data, and I know that, for example, Driveline has created some tools that allow you to incorporate all these different technologies into one tool, but how much of your job or how much of the company's job is creating formats that allow this to be easily digested and used by coaches, and where are you in that process?
Well, I think that's what differentiates us from other companies, that we will do whatever it takes, customize reports, we will visit, we will, again, do whatever it takes. Some clubs, they take the data and never talk to us, and other ones, I hate to say hand-holding, but they really do need more attention and ask questions, and we could be on the phone with them, once a week, and I get that, and it's whatever it takes, yeah. So,
And Seth, along those same lines, can you expand a little bit on your effort to make the data available and digestible, and what some of what goes into that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first maybe couple of years, we really were a data collection tool and didn't provide a lot of services on the back end. And part of that is we were still learning and growing and understanding what to do and how to interpret some of these things ourselves. We have millions and millions of hits and pitches that have been captured on our system now. So it's this really kind of broad environment that we get to go in and learn and study from our own data. And that's, kids when they're 12, and that's also the elite of the elite, talking about MLB teams and the millions of pitches that we have captured from that. So it's kind of our job then to take that and put that back into different formats, whether that's reports or graphs or charts or anything like that that can be really understood and how to interpret the data. And then also going into, I think education was a great point that he brought up, and especially what we're doing around that, knowing that there's certain levels of coaches that have been exposed to this for years. And there's also a lot of coaches that are now getting access to this data that haven't had it before. And there's going to need to be some education there. And so that's one of the things that we're doing. I know certifications are a really kind of hot topic thing right now with a lot of different places and organizations doing it, but that's something that we're very heavily involved with as well, launching different certification programs, just to give that access to the coach to say, not just like here's Rapsodo and a PowerPoint or anything like that, but it's more so diving in, talking with the industry experts, understanding what is the data, how to interpret it, and then how are industry experts using it, and trying to get that message out to the teams.
And TJ, I don't know, are you focused more on the consumers, the fans, or the teams?
I think first and foremost, we're looking to put forth the best products we can, and right now our primary consumers for the data will be the teams, because they'll be the ones who are giving us feedback on a day-to-day basis as we head into the season, and from there on out, we'll touch all the other products at MLB and Baseball Savant and whatnot. Yeah, I think it's different kind of from like a league perspective and how you view the data, because it's not necessarily how do you utilize data to create a competitive advantage as I had in my prior job with the Mets. It's how do we create the best product and make it scalable, not knowing how all 30 teams are going to end up utilizing the data. So it's kind of having the foresight to create a scalable product that allows teams to do what they want with the data.
I want to go back to my second question, which was essentially, what have we learned? And I was hoping we could maybe get something really specific that one or two or all of you have learned about the game itself, or about specific players or sorts of players. And feel free, anyone who's got something can jump in here.
well, I'll start. So some are receptive to data and some just aren't. So it's almost night and day. And it's somewhat surprising that more people aren't buying into it, but some of the guys love it, and other guys are just, it's going through a process, and they're not buying in, and you could tell. I don't deal right now with the players directly, but in the recent past, I have, and I think they need to start younger for the buy-in, for total buy-in. But it still surprises me that there's not more player buy-in. But I know that'll change, but it's just going to take time. So.
TJ or Seth?
Go ahead, DJ.
I think one of the interesting things is having done this for a while, you see how the way the game has changed a little bit. And I think when I first started in 2005 with the Nationals, everything was kind of flat files and looking back at the past. And got to the point where you went from there to projection systems. And I think some of the interesting things that we've raised with tracking data and all different varieties is that it makes these models come to life. And every team has their own projection system. You can go on Prospectus and Fangraphs and see projections. But I think the cool thing that tracking data has allowed you to do is figure out what can we tweak about a player that's going to allow him to exceed those expectations that everyone else has. And I think the teams that have been able to take advantage of that have seen a huge advantage. And you see guys like on the Dodgers, like Max Muncy, who was a minor league free agent, take off once they knew that they can get him into their system.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm sure there's a few different areas here, but something smaller that's maybe a little bit more granular, but something we definitely have seen as we go back and look at the data, or even as simple as like pitch types and pitch tagging, and what one person may call their specific pitch may not be exactly what you would expect it to be. More specifically, breaking pitches that don't move in the way that you would expect it to, and one guy's calling it a slider, it's really a slurve or a curve. You kind of expect that and think that maybe for the younger ages, but you can go across any team right now and you can see there's variations of each pitch type that are getting called similar sort of things in the system as people tag them. So as we look at auto pitch tagging and other things like that that we have coming out, it's always an interesting thing that what the pitch actually is versus what a guy may think it is. It's always kind of eye-opening to do those bullpens as we have MLB guys come into our facility and do some sort of testing or evaluation. And understand, I thought I was throwing a slider, but look at this, it's more curve movement or vice versa. It's just an interesting sort of revelation. Somebody at that level that can still kind of pick up something from a pitch design standpoint.
With the recent sign stealing scandals, there have been some calls out there for less technology in the ballparks, at least in the major league parks, and I'm just wondering if any of you want to weigh in on that and consider the possibility that maybe at least the in-stadium technology might have gone a bit too far and we need to ratchet back on that a little bit. TJ, maybe you're probably the closest to this situation, but maybe the one who's least able to comment on it, but just wondering if any of you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting problem that technology has raised, and I think obviously the commissioner has plans for how he's planning on handling it, and I want to kind of talk beyond my realm there. But technology is not going to stop improving. Like where we are right now is a world of difference from where we were 5 years ago, and it's going to be a world of difference 5 years from now. And I think that we're going to have to adjust to what those technologies are and what they allow us to do. And I think the commissioner has a plan in place that's going to allow us to get to that point.
Let's talk about 5 years from now, since you brought it up. Obviously, nobody can predict the future anywhere near 5 years, given how quickly the technology is advancing, but I'm sure that all of you have thought about things you would like to be doing or seeing in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I think obviously the big technology that's out there right now is computer vision and how that's going to affect how we utilize video and machine learning to better understand things that we can't fully quantify right now. So if we're able to utilize that technology to better quantify pitcher's deception, or better quantify, or be able to assess the probability that a pitcher is going to maintain health from a 16-year-old to the draft. Those are huge things that are going to help benefit the game and improve the decision-making process. Having just looked at the last 10 years of the MLB draft, the amount of players that go on to have an impact has shifted further up within the draft. And so I think that going back 10 years, guys fell through, and you're able to get a guy like Seth Lugo in the 38th round. And now those guys are getting picked a lot higher because of the technologies allow you to identify that. And I think some of the things that we're able to do to auto process video are going to allow us to take it a step even further.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We're very heavily investing in machine learning, what that's going to do even for our existing products and then future products as well. We're almost at the point now that we ultimately know we have to adapt and continue to improve and innovate. So 5 years out for us is probably something that maybe there's a broad picture, but there's not going to be anything concrete because there's going to be so much new that we couldn't even go out that far. So probably the next 24 months is about as far as we can possibly plan from a new iteration or whatever that may look like standpoint. But definitely to kind of reiterate off of TJ's standpoint, the ability to help kind of quantify players as we get more and more of these athletes starting at a younger age on systems, like Rapsodo, but other ones that are obviously out there as well that provide different metrics. As we start to kind of overall put that into a way to help evaluate and understand what players look like from a scouting recruiting standpoint, and really make that metric driven, and then again get into players that have teams have never had access to get their data. That sort of thing is just going to continue to explode, in my opinion, and something we're excited about.
Scott?
Yeah, so we utilize machine learning now. That's the basis of our motion capture system, but we just focus on pitching and hitting. So in 5 years, I would envision the entire field. And also the trickle down. In 5 years, I would expect every Division I team to have this data or these systems and this data so that, yeah, again, the predictive analytics would be a lot more powerful. And just like TJ was talking about the draft, we'll have that data to be able to utilize it more effectively.
So one of the things that has concerned me as a fan is that I worry about the cost of the technologies, all the different technologies that we see and hear about, especially when we as travel baseball becomes so expensive for young players. Do you see any reason for optimism when it comes to cost? And I'm sure that you're working on ways to bring the cost down of your technology. But looking long term, what I see, and I might well be wrong, is the costs of becoming a great young player just increasing and making the game less and less accessible for kids who don't have money, whose parents don't have money. Am I wrong about that, Scott?
I have no idea. I mean, it's a great question, but I mean, with all technology, it's improving and it's getting cheaper. Now, when do these kids when did they have access to this? Can they have access to this technology? Yeah, right now they don't, but I mean, it's a great question. I don't know. Yeah.
Seth?
Yeah, from our side, it's almost kind of the opposite. That's one of our goals. We've always kind of been known as that cost leader, and when you look at us from a competitive standpoint, that's one of our probably key indicators of why we've been so successful at getting it not just into the major league market, but pushing it down. And even our efforts with, I guess you can give a shout out to the commissioner's office and PDP and the prospect development pipeline and the work that we do with them from a ball flight tracking standpoint, that those are invite only events. They're free events. They're not costing mom and dad anything, and they get direct exposure to all 30 ball clubs. I know that there's international scouting events, and I think those type of initiatives and those things that are going to be put on will continue to evolve. And the idea of being able to get your word out and get your name out by using, I know so many teams I've talked to that said, we just signed a guy and his agent gave us your bullpen report. And we looked at that, and that's what led us to go after that guy. So the ability to maybe not have to pay to go to one of those events, but be able to get that data and then get it into the hands of the people that need to see it, that's an intriguing step that technology, I think, will help and hopefully not price out too many folks.
Well, that's a really good point that Seth makes, which is that clearly we've all seen examples, if we pay attention on social media, of players who essentially were discovered and signed based on through relatively low-cost technologies. So there is an upside there too, I think, obviously. TJ, you've been around the game for a long time. Can you talk a little bit about the general discussion of opening the game up for young players who perhaps can't afford a lot of the things that are happening out there right now?
Sure. Yeah, I think obviously like technology has opened up a lot of areas of analysis and our understanding of the game. And it's just as an example from the team perspective, like obviously like in the last 10 years, like 15 years, we've seen, we've used technology to help quantify catchers framing and their receiving abilities. And what we've been able to do is push down to our scouts who might be looking at high school players around the country to we end up studying players who end up being good framers at the big league level and understand what their technique is. And then we're able to apply the same principles down to high school and an international level where we might not have full player tracking data. I think the same sort of principles apply in little leagues and high schools around the country, in that you don't necessarily need the most expensive technology to measure your bat speed or your spin rate on your curveball. Well, not taking away from Seth there, but I think we can utilize technology to help understand what are the intrinsic baseball principles that we're trying to teach to these young people and get them to the point that point where money is less of an issue.
And speaking of young people, a big piece of SABR Analytics are the students. We don't have as many of them this year in the room as we usually do, but certainly they're watching right now and they've been here. I'd love for each of you to talk a little bit about maybe some off the beaten path tracks that young people could take who want to get into the technology part of the game right now. Scott?
Well, there's so many different pieces of technology. So you go from the motion capture, you go from a radar gun. So there's things that are really expensive that are probably out of reach for the foreseeable future. And then there's things that are a lot cheaper. So I think starting, I mean, that makes the most sense, right? Start simple, get them involved, and then it's just, that's step one, just get them involved. And then if they buy in, then there's a million steps forward. So just exposing them to step one would be the way to go.
I think there's no shortage of data out there right now between sites like Baseball Reference and Savant and Fangraphs. Like, just take initiative to answer questions that you may have, and like learn the tools that are needed to answer those questions. I remember way back when I was trying to get a job, I had questions about the draft or what goes into a winning team or understanding lineup construction. And the data back then and the tools back then were probably a little less sophisticated than they are today. But there's so many ways that you can go out and pursue your own interests and to get your research out there. Maybe a guy like Tom Tango is going to see some of the work you have online and give you some feedback. And that probably wasn't something I had available when I was back when I was getting to the game. But take initiative. There's so much out there right now.
Seth, how did you come to do what you do?
Yeah, a little bit different. I didn't necessarily have the technology background, but I played baseball in college at a small D3 school north of Indianapolis, Anderson University, and then immediately after started working for a software communications company and just sort of helped that company grow as we learned a lot through that. Small world with the investors of that company. Happened to be the only investor of Rapsodo and knew that I had played and had an interest, and also had that technology sort of introduction, if you will, into that company, and made the connection. So a little bit of a small world, as they were based out of Singapore, and obviously I was not. Made that work, and then ultimately we're able to get things started over here. What would have been about 5 years ago, but definitely from you mentioned kind of off the beaten path, and to echo what these guys have said, we're lucky enough to have Washington University in our backyard, and so obviously a SABR kind of alum of those case studies that frequently take part in that. But one of the things that we always tell our interns that are coming in, and also something that we hear when we're talking to teams, is that this technology and people that have experience with the technology have a leg up in that hiring process, that they need people that know how to use it, understand it, interpret it. And so just like what TJ was saying, there's no shortage of it. Almost every college that's going to be out there has some sort of technology And there's also usually a need for people to come in and help the coaches understand what that is. So almost everybody we talk to, if they have an interest in that but don't really have the experience, we really tell them to do that or look for an academy that's local to them that has one. Guaranteed there's going to be some sort of piece of technology around you that you can kind of help and build models and help, where a lot of these coaches are not going to have the ability to do that and would eat it up. And when you come, the next time for an interview and have this example of what you did with your college or high school or academy, now you use that data, it's just an automatic leg up. So that's kind of our big thing.
And by the way, since Seth did sort of mention this, hope Scott won't be angry with me. I will mention that for students looking for something to do in the summertime, I suspect that a great number of collegiate summer teams are looking for help along these lines, including the teams in the league I'm commissioner of, the West Coast League. So if you want to spend a summer in the Pacific Northwest, and everyone should want to do that, please hit me up. Scott, how about you? What was your career path?
So I am one of the rare individuals that went to school for just what they're doing 25 years later. So yeah, I went into kinesiology undergrad. I was always good at computers, math, loved sports, and the biomechanics field just was perfect for me. So I pursued that and started using motion capture in 1994 when it was brutally painful and took a very long time to process. One pitch would take 7 or 8 hours, and I'm not even kidding. So now it's automatic, and I've been in the field in clinical research, orthopedic research, worked for a few marker-based companies, and if I never put a marker on somebody again, so it's come a long way. So I've seen it really evolve, and now we've moved to, this is the time we can now analyze the data instead of processing the data. So it's exciting for me to see it come this far. But yeah, I went really into school just for what I'm doing now. So yeah.
All right, I've got a couple of questions here, and if you have any of your own, please get them in on the YouTube channel. You can type those in, or if you're in the room, there are cards. We've talked about tech in the USA. How about going international? I think that TJ actually referenced this, but anything anyone wants to say about these efforts overseas? Feel free.
Sure. Go ahead, TJ. You got it.
Sure, yeah. I think obviously with all this technology, there's a trickle-down effect. Some of it starts at the big league level, but it's going to get to the minor leagues and get to colleges, and actually it's going to get down to international guys. And you end up putting some data down. You end up getting tracking data on 14, 15-year-olds that you're looking at to sign internationally. And I think that's great and everything. I think the hard part of that is understanding what the predictive value of understanding what exit velocity for a 14-year-old means. And just building up the amount of data that you need to understand how does this translate to when the kid's going to be 21, 22, 23. And obviously with data continuing to improve and get better, it's hard to build up the data sets. I think that's one of the challenges with putting stuff in at that level, and you have to figure out what does knowing a 14-year-old spin rate mean. And obviously every piece of data you have helps to shape how you're going to evaluate and develop that player. But I think the long-term predictive value is in question for some of these newer technologies. That's just the nature of having newer technologies, not against the products themselves.
Yeah, I think to speak of that, we're in kind of a unique situation that TJ kind of brings up, that we do capture data on kids that if you think we've been doing it for 5 years, some of the early guys that were a part of that, we have them when they're 14, and then now they're draft eligible. And that's what I think it's an interesting case study that we're definitely looking heavy at our data collection that we have to understand what is that and how do we build out that predictive model system that we're definitely taking a look at and we hope to help in that. But from an international standpoint, I would say most of our teams, at least half that we work with, also send some of our monitors down into the Dominican Republic and into their sort of camps that they have down there to capture data on all the kids that they're interested in. And then also we have an initiative over with the Asian Pacific group that we have our own team that are out there selling into those regions as well. So that seems to be a high area of growth. That there's a lot of opportunity in with that, a lot of interesting things that we're learning, and I think that group's learning as well. So it's an interesting kind of mix and dynamic with that.
I have a very specific question here about third-party integration. And Seth, I know you guys integrate with Driveline's Track app, but I'm just wondering. I think the question is basically for all of you. Do you what are your mechanisms, your protocols, if people want to integrate with a third party, an API, Bluetooth, that sort of thing?
Yeah, for us, a huge push on that in 2020. We plan on integrating with bat sensors, blast, DK. Obviously now with Driveline, taking over from Modus, that's going to be a big point for us as well from an integration. So we plan on that for an API, both in real time and post data collection. So you can then review the data, but also in real time be able to look at one app, if you will, and be able to see side by side data. So that's a big push for us. We've not done that in the past, but for 2020, we started teasing that out a little bit, and then also building the systems and the infrastructure need to do that. So I would say probably by midsummer of this year, we'll have something out there ready to go for most of those.
TJ, I have a related question about that. You mentioned for someone who wants to, young people who want to get into this, they can ask a question and then figure out how to answer it. Can they access the data easily that you guys have, the StatCast data, or is it just a matter of figuring out how to scrape it? What are the procedures there?
I don't believe we post our play-by-play data online, but between Baseball Savant, there's a ton of StatCast data that is available, and in different sorts of ways, whether it's through their search tool or different tables that you can export or scrape in that regard, and allows you to kind of dive into some of the cool metrics that we do have, whether it's pitch related and spin rates or some of the new defensive metrics that we rolled out in the past year, like outfield outs above average, infield outs above average. And I think there's a lot of interesting data sets there you can kind of dive into and put into your, whether it's Python, R, Excel, or SQL, you can play with it any way you want to.
And then if I could just chime in.
Yep.
Yeah, so for international, just to get back to that, so by this time next year, I would expect Japanese and Korean teams. We'd expand there. And then also the third party, so with biomechanical data, force plates are a big addition. So we provide temporal spatial, kinematic data, but coupled with force plates, we can calculate the kinetics. So we can look at power, we can look at moments or torque. So we can do that. So in pitching tunnels or batting cages, we can integrate with those to provide further additional information. And then really anything we can time synchronize with, and then marry that data in biomechanical software programs.
Now, this might be our last question, and it's a fantastic question that I should have thought of, actually. So thanks to whoever wrote it down or sent it in. This has been a sort of an under-the-radar topic for the last year or two, and I'll just open this up to the floor, basically. How are players and teams navigating data ownership?
as far as ours goes, essentially data that's going to be captured on the team's devices that they pay for and lease. Obviously, that's going to be data that they would collect and then get access to. In our terms and conditions or whatnot, that's going to be something that they have ownership to. That's kind of part of that premium model that we have with those MLB teams. I know a lot of teams, the majority of them didn't share that data with the players, whether that be through the after the fact bullpen report or whether they review the data. And some teams don't. Some pitchers don't care to see it, and some do. So that's kind of open to them. A lot of them when they train in the off season. This past year was the first year that we really had the idea that teams came to us about getting some of that data as they had a specific set of players that were looking to continue development on the development plan that they had, which was great to see. And so they wanted to share that data with the teams. And so that was an interesting thing as we were able to build out profiles for players to be able to share back. And a lot of times players are on their own and use either their own device that they purchase or an academy or wherever they're going to be training. And that's going to be data then that obviously wouldn't be collected on the team's application or inside of their account. So that's going to be data that they would then own and have access to. So it kind of depends on the use case and then how that model looks out between the team and the players for each organization.
Yeah, this has been like an issue that's kind of touched not just baseball but other sports as well. And just dipping back to my my time with the Mets, one, getting the player to buy into whatever technology you're pushing out was of the utmost importance. So I think before we rolled out any new technology, whether it was a bat sensor, whether it was stuff like Rapsodo or other wearable technology, we made it clear to players what exactly the technology was, what it was tracking, and usually there was no risk to whatever we were putting out there, but it kind of walking them through that process so that they were comfortable putting on whatever wearable it was or adding something to their bat or whatnot. So that getting that buy-in for us was very important. And after each sort of experience, we would share that data with the player in a way that allowed them to fully understand what we were tracking and kind of go from there.
TJ, I was actually skeptical about a lot of the data being ever released to the public a few years ago because I thought there's no way the players are going to put up with, whoever it is being displayed as by far the slowest third baseman in baseball. You've seen those on StatCast data, but it's there. And I'm just wondering, have you ever had any experience with players being upset that all of a sudden they were exposed, their particular weakness might be exposed?
Yeah, but at the same time, you could have the same player. Like you have other. You go to Baseball Reference and see who has the lowest OPS, who has the most strikeouts, or who has no stolen bases, or things along those lines. So I think it's kind of an offshoot of that. And I think once we start, just from being in the clubhouse over the last few years, you get understanding. Once you bring some of these things into a more public, players get more competitive about it. And I think just my experience, guys knew who had the highest sprint speed to first base, or the highest sprint speed or time to first base, and two different metrics there. And they had it in the back of their mind that they were going to beat that guy out when they were never given the opportunity. And I think that's what metrics do. They kind of they create like a playing field and create goals for what players shoot for, and whether that's batting average or on base, or whether it's sprint speed or exit velocity, these are things that guys are just trying to achieve, work towards one day.
TJ, Seth, Scott, this was great. Thank you so much.